Welcome back to our second in a series of podcasts for Innovate Fingal and for Tech Week. I have just finished up my chat with Barry Moore of Vitality Neuro Rehabilitation. I think you're going to really enjoy this talk. It is about tech. It is about the crossover between tech and hands-on care. It is an area that I did not know much about myself. I assume a lot of people watching this aren't going to know a lot about this area as well. It is truly fascinating, and I hope you enjoy. So for listeners who have not come across you or your business before, can you tell us a bit about yourself, about the business? Give us the elevator pitch.
Yeah, so Vitality Neuro Rehab is a service for people who have a neurological diagnosis. So something like a spinal cord injury, a stroke, multiple sclerosis, cerebral palsy, that type of thing. And we provide a exercise and movement based coaching service to help people kind of regain autonomy in their bodies, independence in their daily lives, and just help them maximize their recovery and to continue to train their bodies as they live with these diagnoses.
Great. And maybe kind of ask you a bit about your journey. So you
Yeah.
started, obviously you're Irish, you started here, you started your college in DCU, then you took a long journey through the States.
Yeah.
And what brought you back here? So can you tell us a bit about that?
Yeah, so when I was in DCU, I studied sports science and health. And as part of that course, I had to do an internship that led me over to the States, working in adaptive summer camps for kids with disabilities, of all kinds of disabilities. And from there, I loved that summer, went back and did it another year, and then just found myself in the States for a year after college on a 1-year visa. And while I was there, I learned of a master's program in kinesiology and applied for that and got a scholarship and worked for the university in teaching undergrad students adaptive exercise and inclusive fitness for again a broad range of disabilities. So I was a graduate assistant to a professor there who kind of helped me then. She as part of that, she was a mentor to me and helped me kind of find that area that I wanted to get into, and that led me to a neuro rehab clinic that was in Indianapolis where I was studying. And yeah, one thing led to another there. I was an intern, and then they hired me straight out after I graduated. And yeah, I worked there for a few years, came back to Dublin during COVID, and then ultimately went back to the States again, continued at that rehab clinic. It was called Neuro Hope. And from there, I was made the lead exercise specialist. And after a while then, before I came home, I just said I'd take the guts of a year to go and learn something new. So I was really fortunate to have met Stephanie Comella from Zebrafish Neuro. And she kind of took me under her wing and gave me a whole new insight into neuro recovery and a different approach to it. So that took me out to the West Coast in Oregon for the guts of a year.
And what, for somebody like me, and I'm sure a lot of people listening who this area will be very new to them, what I guess, if there are kind of key differences between what you did at Neuro Hope and Zebrafish?
Zebrafish,
yeah.
Zebrafish in the States,
yeah,
Zebrafish here.
Yeah.
So Neuro Hope was a clinic that was a hybrid model of physiotherapy, occupational therapy, personal training and guided exercise. And part of my role when I first went in was to develop a wellness program there, so kind of group fitness and kind of community-based events. So it was a much bigger scale, and they're in a really massive, impressive facility now. Zebrafish, on the other hand, was much more niche and kind of brought down into Zebrafish uses a lot of Pilates-based methods and different concepts that kind of go outside the typical neuro recovery philosophy in terms of stimulating the nervous system in a specific way to regain muscle function. They looked outside of that and looked to things like connective tissues in the fascia and different movement principles and body relationships and things like that. So just a whole different perspective.
Yeah.
And being able to combine those two models between the activity-based therapy at NeuroHope to the Pilates-based, more holistic kind of approach that zebrafish bring to things. It's been really cool to kind of combine those two.
And you started Vitality in 2025. You're based out of Mulhuddart, Blanchardstown.
Yeah.
What kind of made you make the decision to come home, and how did it how did, I guess, everything that you took over from the States influence kind of you starting up this business here in Dublin?
Yeah, so I think from my DCU days, a good friend of mine in there, the two of us, we'd always kind of talked about starting our own place or doing our own thing and trying to like innovate in a way in the health science kind of sphere. And being out in the States, like I knew I always wanted to come home, just to be closer to family and things like that. And yeah, when I found this kind of like niche area in the States, it like immediately I was just like, yeah, that's what I want to do when I get home. And yeah, it was kind of a no-brainer to come home and do it. It's just an area that is needed in Dublin and in Ireland.
And when somebody leaves kind of rehab in Ireland, they have a spinal cord injury, they have some kind of brain injury. Mm-hmm. Like, what does leaving a place like that look like re-entering the real world, and how does Vitality fit into that?
Yeah, so that's kind of the exact position I want Vitality to be in, is that when people leave the hospital or the National Rehab Hospital in Dunleary, that they have a continued option, whether it be that they want to continue with their rehab and try to regain as much function as possible, or whether it be just like, I accept my situation, but I want to train my body as much as I can. I want to get strong and fit so my shoulders are stronger and healthier, and I'm avoiding those kind of injuries from pushing a wheelchair or transferring or anything like that. But I think too that so many people come out and they're just kind of like, now what? What do I do now? How do I continue to get better? How do I provide for my family? Like things like that, you know. And there are some great support services out there in terms of connecting people with services, something like Spinal Injuries Ireland, right? But to my knowledge, in Dublin, there's nowhere dedicated to providing that physical rehab, the exercise-based approach. And that's basically what I'm trying to do, is give people that option after that. But then you look at diagnoses where they're not necessarily, you know, going into a rehab hospital for a 3 or 6 month stay. They've been given a diagnosis that's progressive, like MS, and it's trying to help people manage the progression of that. And there's so much science and research out there to back the importance of exercise for everybody, let alone people who have a diagnosis that is connected to their central nervous system.
And forgive my ignorance in this, if it is the case.
Yeah.
But I assume in a modern age, there's probably apps, online courses, like these kind of facilities out there when people are in those kind of situations. Like, why is your approach, kind of a maintained hands-on approach, still so important in this kind of modern world?
Yeah, so apps and all that kind of stuff is certainly like where everything's going, right? But when it comes to these types of challenges that people face, it's so personalized, it's so individualized, and a lot of what my job is to kind of highlight and identify those compensations or those areas where you're lacking stability or strength or mobility, and trying to create an intervention that targets that specifically. And it's very hard to do that through an app and create like a generalized program that people can just go through. Yeah, and yes, you can do that for like health and wellness and exercise, but if it's tailored to something that is something like tone or spasticity, like what's the root cause of that tone or spasticity, and how can we address that? It's very hard to do that through a generalized kind of app or set of exercises.
And obviously there is a lot of benefit to modern technology as well, and I assume in your space as well. Like, I think I've read that you work with patients across Ireland. You have some patients in the UK, the US. Like, where does that modern technology really fit in and benefit all of this hands-on element? I guess particularly for, I assume, patients who need a specialist like you, but maybe just aren't down the road.
Yeah, so that was a huge draw for me going out to Zebrafish in Oregon. A lot of the work we did there was remote coaching through the likes of Zoom. And, even me initially, like, I was like, neuro rehab through Zoom, like, how do you do that? But the beauty of being able to use Zoom and kind of whittle things down to some core exercises is that, someone could come to me, like, I have people that come to me from Belfast or Tipperary or Laois, and, they can come up to me for a day, but then they can go home and do multiple exercises throughout their week, so they don't have to come to me every day. And it's the same with all my clients, that they're taking ownership of their own recovery as well. Yeah. That they're not dependent on being in my space and with me. So being on Zoom with people, and what I learned from Zebrafish was to take where they're at and how do we give them exercises and things that they can do where they're the main person in it. It's not about having a personal trainer or a family member or a physio doing the work for them. How do we whittle it down and really get into the 80% exercises? Yeah. How can they do 80% of the movement, and how do we make that connected to function and independence and more autonomy in their day-to-day lives?
So can I ask you, without, I guess, naming specific clients, but is there a typical session, or if there isn't a typical session, can you walk us through what a session in a certain area might look like with you?
Yeah, so certainly I wouldn't say there's a typical session, right? Each client may have a session that looks somewhat typical to them because repetition and practice is going to be so key for them. With my approach, like, a lot of what I do is not about targeting muscles and strengthening things. It's about how do we help people connect to their body? How do we help people create an awareness about their body where there's kind of those gray areas of, like, their paralysis effect, say, from their chest line down, say their nipple line down. Mm. But in that area, there's some gray space, and, like, can they feel it? Can they connect to it? Can they move it? A large part of my job is to help them find that kind of connection and awareness of their body, and then build in that kind of strength training and kind of function and autonomy. So it's hard to say, but a typical session might include something like breath work to start, some rolling, some basic kind of mobility drills or exercises that help them get out of their chair position, right? So a lot of people sit in wheelchairs all day, and the only time maybe they get out of their chair is into a standing frame or into their bed. That might be the only time they get out of the chair. So giving them that opportunity to get out of their chair position and just kind of move their body a little bit, and then we'll get into some kind of specific things that meet their needs and their goals.
Great. This is the Tech Week podcast. So you have, I think there's a very interesting angle on kind of what it is that you're doing, how it fits into tech. Yeah. Like, we've spoken a little bit about that, I guess, on the kind of remote therapy kind of side of things. Yeah. But are there any specific technologies either available in Ireland or available outside of Ireland that you'd like to see in Ireland in your space that, like, you'd like to talk about?
So there's certainly technology out there in neuro rehab, like, without a doubt, and some of it's, like, really amazing technology that can be really beneficial to people in different situations. In Ireland, I'm not all that aware of, like, what's out there and readily accessible to people in Dublin particularly. But with that, like, my approach to therapy and movement coaching and stuff, as I've progressed in my career, I have found myself kind of moving more and more away from technology and going more and more into people's bodies and thinking more about the different systems that exist in someone's body and how do we address those and how could maybe something like the nervous system or the digestive system be an issue in their recovery or a barrier to X, Y, or Z. But where I've found technology beneficial is when the therapy around that technology is really good, right? And oftentimes what I've found is that sometimes the technology can be the first thing on the list.
Yeah.
Okay, we have this piece of kit and we have this piece of kit and this technology. Which one of those will best help this person? Rather than trying to think, what does this person need? And then does one of those technologies support that? And that's where I think the tech in this world can be so amazing, but also limiting in certain ways. And I have colleagues in the States that I speak with like regularly enough, and one was just saying how they've set up a new space, and they've kind of changed their approach a little bit with that new space. And I'm actually referred to it as more like an analog studio, right? And they've found where like their results are so much better and quicker, and they're seeing changes in their clients because they've moved away from that tech, and maybe those people using the tech weren't best suited to use the tech, but because it was available, they were almost like, and I've kind of thrown this term around with some colleagues as well, is like, are we forcing recovery on people with technology, or are we empowering them with technology? And there's a fine line, a fine balance in that, you know.
And do you see that as an issue here, or is it perhaps a more prevalent issue in, say, the United States, where it's private healthcare and it's very much, maybe there's a sinister element of, you know.
Well, there's two ways to kind of look at that. Like, there aren't that many places here that are doing this type of therapy and this kind of rehab. And in the States, like, every major city has one or two or three different kind of centers that you can go to, and a lot of them will incorporate these technologies. Again, I'm not in any way anti-tech, right? I definitely support the use of tech in it, but I just don't think it's readily available here in Dublin to access it. And then if it is, that I'm not aware of it, right? But if it is here, I don't know how it's being implemented, you know.
Okay. There are nonetheless a lot of interesting technologies in this space, and I've said particularly in the US. Like, are there any specific technologies, or is there even like one technology that you know exists outside of Ireland that you'd love to see make its way here?
Yeah, absolutely. Yes, absolutely. So there's a lot of hype around certain stimulators now. So electrical stimulation is a huge technology that exists in multiple spaces in rehab, not just neurological rehab, but in neuro rehab, electrical stimulation has been like something that's exists for decades now. What's become more and more buzzy now the last couple of months and just over the last year is the more transcutaneous spinal cord stimulator. So typically a spinal cord stimulator would be implanted in surgery, and it's controlled through a remote device that helps with the stimulation of the spinal cord. They've now developed a technology that you can use with pads on the neck and different areas of the thorax. And that's been really buzzy at the moment. I think there's still a lot of research to be done on how beneficial it can be and will be. With the electrical stimulation, there's also ones that you can place on certain body parts that are designed to stimulate the nervous system in a task specific way, and you can use that then to do a lot of things, like help retrain certain movements, but then also using that stimulation to create contractions and muscle, the squeeze in the muscle that we do in our daily lives. but we're not accessing because of paralysis in certain situations. And I think the health benefits to that, not just the recovery benefits, but the health benefits and wellness benefits and the prevention of secondary disease is a really important aspect of it to consider, and helping people gain regular access to it. And that's the problem with some of these technologies, where there's a huge cost to some of them. It's also a cost to somebody to come to a centre like Vitality and then use that. And if they want to use it every day, how do we make that more affordable and accessible? And if it's not, how effective is the technology when it's only used once a week or once every other week for maybe 30 minutes to 60 minutes at a time? So there's, again, a whole conversation around access and the use of it and the implementation of it.
You've touched on it, and I think you've talked about it before, that these modern technologies, they're great and all, but they're only as useful as the therapy that's applied to them. How has that kind of influenced your approach to the clinic here in Dublin?
Yeah, so certainly I think that the therapy is the key part, and the right choice in how to use the technology is the key part in implementing the technology. With the likes of that ARC-EX, I was at a talk for that, and the representative there referred to it as a device that's not a Netflix device, as in, like, you had to be active and you had to be in therapy, and the therapy was the most important part of the technology. So for me, my approach has certainly come away from technology as I've progressed, and the idea is that it gives people access, right? So if someone comes into me and we spend an hour with technology, how do they then implement what we did over the course of the week until they see me again next week? And what my approach and my philosophy on it is that an hour with me once a week can give you so much. But what if we could give you tools from that 1 hour that you can implement multiple times a day, every day, and it doesn't have to be a specific therapy session or a training session? That's where my approach has kind of moved away from technology a little bit, but it'll certainly circle back to technology as the business grows and as things kind of proceed and some of these technologies become more accessible and more available.
I wonder, like, on the accessibility point, like, a big gap really for, I guess, most people accessing a lot of these technologies is availability and cost here in Ireland.
Yeah.
And that's both in a clinic such as your own and having these devices within the clinic. But if I'm right in saying maybe an element of what you're touching on, what you're talking about, is the gap between what's even at the best level of technology, what's available in a clinic and what realistically they have to go home and do. Like, is there still a long road to go between what some of these technologies can do and having some form of it that, say, somebody with a spinal cord injury could actually have in their own home?
Yeah, so there are certainly companies that develop these technologies, and the in-home use is certainly a big aspect. And a lot of these electrical stimulation devices, they do have programs to try help people get it into their home where it can be accessed daily. But again, it's just a huge cost still, you know. And, you know, working in the States, it's like the insurance system over there kind of rules everything. And, you know, a lot of these devices were tried to be claimed through their insurance, and 9.9 times out of 10 it's denied because of the cost, you know, even though the research and the science is there to back the importance of using these technologies on a daily basis. It's the cost really that set people back.
And is there anything that you think can be done either on like a state or a policy level that could help to bridge some of this gap for the affected peoples?
I mean, I'd love to say yes, like if we, I mean, investment is the big piece, isn't it? And how do we govern that like with policies? And, you know, you're talking about pieces of kit that are costing tens of thousands, putting them into people's homes. Are they using them correctly? Are they like looking after them? Are they keeping them in working order? It's a hard one to get into, and it's not my necessarily area in terms of like getting into policy, but it's certainly a conversation I'd love to have with people who are better suited to kind of think through that bigger policy level kind of approach to it. Yeah.
So obviously this is the Tech Week podcast. It's been facilitated by Innovate Fingal. You, as you mentioned, you're in your office in Mulhuddart. For people listening or watching who don't know, you are in my old office in Mulhuddart.
Right.
I used to be based out of the Base Enterprise Centre in Mulhuddart. When I moved out, you moved in. And I'm still part of the Innovate Fingal network of centres. I'm here out in Swords now. But even whether it's Swords or when I was in Blanchardstown, I always... I'm originally from Blanchardstown. I had a lot of love for having the business there and kind of living out of there, and obviously so much of family and friends and everything are there. But I guess on a business aspect and on a local level, what has being a member of the Fingal community in Mulhuddart, in Blanchardstown, brought to the business?
Yeah, well, I think the first thing that comes to mind with that is just like the location in general. I targeted Blanchardstown quite specifically because of the location and the access to it. And I know with clients of mine, getting to me is always something that they have to consider and factor in, whether it be public transport or taxis or private transport. The area is great, being just off the M50 and being close to kind of the bigger satellite towns outside of Dublin and in and around Leinster. And Mulhuddart has some great local businesses there as well, and Blanchardstown is it seems to be booming every time you kind of drive around it. There's bigger and more shops and more stores, and the industry in and around that area, the industrial parks is huge. So it just seems to be an area that really fosters innovation and growth in businesses across the spectrum. It's just seems to be a vibrant area that's been empowering for a lot of businesses and new business owners.
We've been noticing a lot, a growth in kind of modern, kind of tech-equipped businesses throughout Fingal, and particularly, I guess, in your space, whether that is medical, therapeutic, any other kind of little connecting strings to your operations. Have you noticed any other interesting businesses or kind of growth, I guess, in your sector in Blanchardstown or in Fingal?
Not that I'm aware of. I think there's certainly a lot of health. There's a big emphasis on health and wellness over the last, and I think since COVID, really, a lot of people have kind of understood the importance of wellness and being active and getting outside and looking after your body and stuff. There has been an uptick in people that I've just come, but again, is that because I'm just home in Ireland now and I'm starting to become aware, or is it an increase in different service providers around? But nothing specific that I'm aware of in Fingal. But
well, as we've talked about, you are in a very niche area as well.
That's it.
It's obviously very interesting.
And I should say, there are a lot of businesses out there that are trying to cater to this kind of population too, and provide support services. So services that are already providing their kind of area, then how can we incorporate more wellness and exercise based stuff into what we're doing? And I've been working with a few people in that space to help make people help make movement and exercise more accessible to people outside of a rehab center.
And you started the business in 2025. It's relatively fresh. On a local level, has there been any specific supports, whether that be local enterprise, like the local enterprise office, networking groups, the chamber, Innovate Fingal, that have kind of helped you to grow the business over the last year?
Yeah, so Innovate Fingal have been fantastic. Yeah, really, really supportive, and having the office in Mulhuddart has been fantastic. And even just being in and around there, like questions about do you guys know of any grants or supports or any advice on this, that, or the other? They take the time to kind of chat with you and hear you out and say, yeah, let me think about that and I'll get back to you, whatever. So yeah, the team over there have been great. I've definitely used the local enterprise office. I've done some of their online courses and some of the mentorship programs that are available through there, the Lean for Business program, and I have found them so helpful in that, I've started kind of referring to it as me putting my brain on paper, because your head does be going in circles and thinking about so many different things, and just to have that conversation with someone who can kind of understand where you're at, and then kind of just like reel in a little bit and then give you a little bit more of a direction. Sometimes you're going around the roundabout and you just need to take that path off, or take that exit and go down that and get that done, then come back and go off on another one. The other networking opportunity I was really fortunate to get involved in was the Back for Business program through Enterprise Ireland. Yeah. So I had applied for that, having returned from the States and coming home to set up the business. So Paula Fitzsimons runs that, and I was really fortunate to be put into a mentorship group under Thomas Ennis, and it was a really, really valuable experience. And again, just to be in that space surrounded by people going through the same thing you're going through was really helpful. And again, still in touch with multiple people from that group, and just having those people that you can kind of lean on as a peer, is really helpful.
Yeah, like I've speak to my own experience in that space. I started this business, I keep saying 5 years ago, but it was 6 years ago now. And we've reached that new anniversary. Yeah. But I definitely found like networking groups and supports and stuff like that were helpful at times in growing the business, but also sometimes at those early stages it was just somebody to not cry to, but like just like other people who are in a similar mindset, who are going through the same stuff you are, just to have a little bit of a moan to, or to celebrate a little victory with. Like, even like from my perspective, like my wife at home is really supportive, and like she's been great with everything, like trying to get the business up and running and all that kind of thing. But through no fault of her own, there's aspects of that she doesn't understand, that my best friends do not understand about this kind of journey I'm going through. And I definitely found that those groups have kind of helped with that. Like, is that something you can kind of sympathize with as well?
100%, and I'm the same. Like, I'm lucky to have like a girlfriend who's so supportive and so like starting to become more involved, and my friends, best in the world, and my family, my parents, my brother, like all so supportive. And I would say my dad and my mom do understand it, because they were entrepreneurs and they were self-employed for a while. But there's just an element of it that you can't express, like how challenging it can be, and the 80-hour weeks and the 70-hour weeks and the 100-hour, like it's relentless, and your brain never truly switches off with it, because there's always those things to be done. So even having those groups to kind of bounce those things off, and then also like one of the big things that that Thomas Ennis would have said to us, or said to me, was like, you gotta have that one thing that's for you. And whether that be going to the gym or going for a walk on the beach or whatever, you gotta carve that time out for yourself, because it'll help you, which will in turn help the business, and in turn help the people that you're trying to help. So yeah, having those groups are just invaluable. So
I guess as well on the starting the business side, and if like maybe for anybody who's watching this who's thinking about going down that path at all themselves, like having completed your first year in busince.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. The business started technically in January 2025. I was doing house visits and all that. I think right around now is like my 1 year mark at the Innovate Fingal Centre in Mulhuddart. Yeah.
And that first year and a half, and you've been in the professional space before that,
Yeah.
is there anything that you can think of that like really surprised you about kind of being in your own business versus
Yeah.
being in somebody else's
Yeah.
business?
So I've definitely got to. So I knew I wanted to come home and start a business and start a service that helped people in this sphere. So when I was working at NeuroHope, my boss Chris Liu was brilliant, and he said, anytime you have questions, I know you want to go home and do this, like come talk to me. And he was so supportive in that. Same with Stephanie with Zebrafish. They both knew my plan to come home,
Yeah.
and they fostered that kind of mentorship around the business side. So I was really, really fortunate in that. But you hear people starting a business and they say, oh, there's just a million things to do, and I always just thought, like, how much could there be, like, how.
Yeah.
And then just hits you, like, there is just constantly so much to do, and in a business where mine is like, I'm hands on with people,
Yeah.
and at an hour or 2 hours at a time, and then you see multiple people in a day. Your service provision is the core of it, and that's what I love doing. And then you finish that day, and then you're like, right, now I got to be the business owner and the business developer and the networker and the responder to emails and the admin. So it's like you do one work day as the employee, and then you have a whole another 6, 7, 8 hour day as the business owner. So it's relentless, and it's exhausting at times, but at the same time, like, I don't think I'd change it in any way.
I do think, and obviously we're very different businesses, but I think, like, 5-ish years down the line ahead of where you are now, there's elements that maybe do calm down a little bit. You get into, at least what I've found, you get into rhythms and you develop like patterns for kind of getting through things a little bit quicker. But then on the other side, there's things that just don't at all. Like I think I was until maybe 11:30 last night. I was doing VAT returns. Like,
I was the exact same.
Yeah.
I was the exact same.
Yeah.
Literally 11 o'clock, emailing my accountant saying, all good. Like, there you go.
And even and maybe even
yeah.
on the surprising element, like, I was like, okay, but one of the first things I decided to outsource was accountants. I was like, look, I don't want. I remember I used to work. I used to work for the Irish Daily Star. There was a lot of freelancers who kind of, like, through various roles would have freelanced. I got to know a lot of them before I went out by myself. And I remember a few of them kind of in conversation with them just saying, like, basically a good accountant will pay for themselves. That, like, they'll find things that you have no idea you can expense. That they'll find, they'll pay somebody who's good at their job, and you will make money, not lose money, and obviously you'll get a huge amount of time back. But even knowing that, a surprising element to me was like, well, I still need to spend a few hours every month going through all the invoices and making sure I have them together, and gathering all that kind of stuff. And there's a million, like, little things like that as well.
And it's like, you say you do your VAT return, people think, oh, there's an hour of your day, but it turns out to be multiple hours, and it's
one of the banes of my life. I like I see a marketing agency, and maybe a little bit different. There's a lot of, like, online subscription things. But one of the banes of my life is how many of them don't email me a receipt that I need to, like, go in and log in and download and whatever. This might be the most boring part of the podcast. I'll cut it out. Okay, so back on you. So I said a year and a half in, things are going well. Like, what does growth look like for you? Is it employing people? Is it a bigger space? Is it new tech, tables, things like that?
Yeah, so kind of all of the above, right? So again, I'm coming from experience in two different kind of settings, and it's about combining those two approaches. So having a kind of hybrid model of physiotherapy and exercise-based movement coaching, wellness programming, all that kind of stuff, like, that's definitely the goal. And with that comes more staff, more space, more equipment, and then carefully and selectively implementing the technologies that will support those those bigger picture tasks, I'd love to implement it where the technology I'd love to implement where it's accessible on a low cost basis, you know. And some of that is partnerships with universities where I was an intern in this space.
Yeah.
And it completely changed my career trajectory. Like, you know, at times I was like, well, I just leave this space and go work in a bank or go work in finance or whatever. But this area, that internship has given me this career now that I absolutely love and that I never knew was really accessible to me because I thought I'd have to be a physio to get into this space.
Yeah.
So having like interns come in and get that experience, and I've been the intern where I got the great experience and felt like I really got something out of it, and I've been the intern where I just felt I was the skivvy and I was like, you know, you do this, you do that. So trying to create an internship kind of program that would give people access to this, but also give people access to services that are much more affordable would be huge.
I know you offer education to professionals as well. Do you see that as a big growth arm of the business?
Yeah, so I was doing that. I was assisting the delivery of educational content with Zebrafish. So Zebrafish's model is all around educating clinicians and trainers as well as the service provision to clients. Yeah. So I was assisting in delivering all that content in the States, in Canada, in Australia. Hopefully we'll get her over here to deliver some content over here as well someday. Definitely the education piece is going to be something I'd love to get into. But again, that becomes where do I have the space mentally and physically to kind of create that content to where it's good enough and it's packaged well enough to benefit people that are taking the course. The other side of that is I've been working with Spinal Injuries Ireland on developing a program to get out into gyms around local communities and helping trainers there who have no experience in neurological disorders. So people coming into the gym with spinal cord injury, a big barrier they're facing is that trainers are saying no to them or gyms are saying no to them because like we don't know how to manage this. So with Spinal Injuries Ireland now we're hoping to roll out a program nationally where we go in and we help trainers in their local gym create that space that they can say yes to people and help people gain access to fitness and exercise in their local community without having to come to a specialised centre like mine.
Great.
Which is cool.
Maybe it's a difficult question. I don't know if you have this in your mind, but like what does success for Vitality look like in a year? What does it look like in 3 years?
Yeah, so it's certainly something that's, you know, you're thinking down the line and where do you want to be a year from now. Like I'd love to be in a little bit of a bigger space where I can offer access to different pieces of equipment and tools that can empower further recovery and further body awareness and connection. And as well as that, then having more space to offer more affordable programs where it might be like small groups or things like that. And that would be a year from now. 3 years from now, you know, it's again just growing the service provision and growing the different avenues that people can come to. And again, recovery just comes in so many different forms, whether it be psychological or physical or social or emotional, whatever. And just trying to grow that space that kind of fosters care and recovery in all aspects of the human, you know, and my approach is certainly becoming more and more holistic. And I say holistic with, like, I know a lot of people may think, oh, that's kind of wooey, but it's just more like the whole person, you know. It's not the alternative therapies or things like that. It's just like thinking, right, what does this person need as a human, not just as somebody who can't move this part of their body or has challenges with this part of their physical being.
And if there's somebody listening, either they themselves or maybe it's a family member or a loved one, who has had a stroke, who has suffered a spinal cord injury. Maybe they feel a little bit lost with what's been offered to them so far, what their current situation is. Is there something that you would like them to hear?
Yes. So I think I hear it time and time again across all my work in the States, across my time now since I've been home. You know, people go into the hospital system with their injury, and then if they're lucky, they get transferred to the National Rehab Hospital, and then after that they're like, now what do I do? And that's where I'm trying to fill that gap, whether it be me physically providing that service to them to help them continue their recovery, or helping them connect to local services in their area, or at least connecting them to someone who has shared lived experience, right? Because there's so much value to that, having that kind of peer support. And you see that a lot in like spinal cord injury or stroke, like there's these peer support programs. But then what about the people who are indirectly affected by the injury or the diagnosis? Providing that support for them and connecting them with people who have that lived experience as well. I think that's huge and potentially like misunderstood in a way, and underrepresented in a lot of ways. So I think the big thing is that you're not the first person to go through this. You won't be the last, and to just reach out to places like myself or your local kind of community organisations like MS Ireland or Spinal Cord Injuries Ireland or Spinal Injuries Ireland or whatever it is. Just reach out and ask the questions. And there's so many people in this space that are wanting to help, and that they want to be there for you as a support and as a guide to get the access you need.
I think if you didn't, which I'm sure you did, explain the holistic element in the previous question, I think you very clearly explained the holistic approach there. It was very nice. So we're getting towards the end here. So a couple of last questions for you.
Yeah.
So if there is a professional, maybe in your space, or maybe it's something that's more broadly applicable as well, that is maybe starting off, is thinking of where to be investing their time and money. And I think maybe we've talked about this already as well, but maybe as a nice bow to put on the end of all of this, is if they're thinking about investing in big tech or investing in their own skills, what is your advice to them?
Definitely your own skills, because, you know, like we kind of talked about, tech is only as good as the therapy that surrounds it. And having the knowledge and the skills, like I'm constantly looking at different continuing education stuff. Having those different aspects to approach a person with therapy and movement and coaching is so empowering. When it becomes spending huge amounts of money on technology, you're then going into that one piece of tech. And then what if that day that tech doesn't work? Yeah. And then you're looking at, I'm like, oh, what do I do with this person? I don't know. Whereas when someone comes to me, I'm like, do I go A, B, or C? B is going to work better today because of what he's told me when he's come in or when she's come in. And then maybe D at a later point is like, that technology is really going to help support A, B, or C.
Yeah.
And when do I implement that? So definitely invest in yourself, because there'll always be a new technology. There'll always be a day where the technology doesn't work, but you always need to be prepped and ready to provide a service for a person that is spending their time, money, and resources to get to you, and trusting in you. They're trusting in you as a professional, not in the technology that you have available to them.
Yeah. So if there's somebody watching or listening to this and is starting a thing in their own business, whether that's in your space or even as a broader spectrum, is there a piece of advice that you wish that you had gotten?
I think what I will say is not necessarily I wish I'd gotten, because I did get it. I think the most valuable piece of advice is, well, two actually. Right? Two is, one, do something for yourself. Like whatever it is, carve that time out for yourself, because it will stand to you, and it'll help you go into your next day or your next week more refreshed and clear-minded and kind of ready to take things on. And then the other side is to like know your strengths and know where your weaknesses are. And like for me right now, I have my areas of strength that I'm really going into, and on the backside I'm like, right, where can I upskill in these areas, and then I'll bring them into it later. So know your strengths, know your weaknesses, and like that's not a negative thing to know your weaknesses. It's a really positive and important thing to recognize, and then where you need to like delegate or outsource those things when you can.
Great. Look, we're pretty much there now. So
Great.
As we finish up, where can people find you? How do people get in touch with you?
Yeah, so we're on all the usual channels. The website is vitalityneuroRehab.ie. My phone number is on there, the Instagram handle. People can contact me on WhatsApp. It's just Vitality Neuro Rehab on whatever channel you're using, and you can find me there. But always happy to talk with people, especially when they're trying to navigate this new space. Always happy to hop on a call, 15, 20 minutes, whatever, and have a chat. I don't charge people for that kind of time. It's just a nice time to get on and gain a perspective and an understanding of where to go. So, yeah.
Thanks, Barry.
You're
That
very
was
welcome.
lovely.
Yeah, thank
Look,
you.
I'm sure for a lot of people watching this, myself included in this conversation, I didn't know a lot about this area. I found a very interesting conversation. I hope people watching will as well.
Okay. Great. Thank you very much. Cheers. Thanks, Seán.
Thanks.